Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here because today's story is something that honestly feels like it was ripped straight out of a movie script, but the pain and the betrayal behind it were very, very real. Imagine standing in a kitchen you helped pay for, looking into the eyes of the man you've supported for 5 years, only to have him tell you that you're a financial burden and that he's found someone who actually matches his status. Imagine being tossed out like yesterday's trash because your bank account didn't have enough zeros, only to realize that he had no idea who he was actually walking away from. So, how did it all come to this? What was the massive secret hidden beneath the surface of a simple, modest marriage? And how did a woman deemed broke end up becoming the most powerful person in the room on her ex-husband's wedding day? But before we dive into this incredible journey of betrayal and ultimate boss-level revenge, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to keep sharing these stories with you. Also, make sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications so you never miss a single moment of the drama. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every single detail of this one. The story begins with Alina, a woman who believed that love was the ultimate foundation for everything. Alina lived a quiet, unassuming life in a small apartment with her husband, Mark. Alina was just a hardworking girl who held down a mid-level administrative job at a local firm. She wore simple clothes, drove a 10-year-old sedan, and clipped coupons like her life depended on it. Mark, on the other hand, was an ambitious mid-level manager at a tech company, a man who became increasingly obsessed with the optics of success. He wanted the designer watches, the luxury cars, and the social circle that shouted arrival. For years, Alina played the part of the supportive wife. She listened to his complaints about his boss, she cheered for his small promotions, and she quietly covered the rent whenever he overspent on his executive image. But as Mark's ego grew, his respect for Alina began to wither. He started making comments about her lack of ambition. He would look at her wardrobe with a sneer, asking why she couldn't be more like the wives of his colleagues, women who draped themselves in labels and spent their afternoons at high-end spas. Alina always responded with a gentle smile, telling him that money wasn't everything and that they had enough to be happy. But in Mark's mind, enough was a dirty word. He didn't want enough, he wanted everything. He began to see Alina not as a partner, but as an anchor dragging him down into the depths of mediocrity. He convinced himself that the only thing standing between him and the life of the elite was the broke woman sitting across from him at the dinner table. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday evening. Alina had prepared a simple meal, hoping to celebrate their 5th anniversary in a quiet, meaningful way. But Mark didn't even sit down. He stood in the doorway with a suitcase already packed, his face cold and devoid of any warmth. He told her without a hint of hesitation that he wanted a divorce. He said he had met someone else, a woman named Tiffany, the daughter of a wealthy real estate mogul. He told Alina that Tiffany was a match for his future, someone who understood the value of wealth and power. He looked at Alina's modest dress and told her that he was tired of being embarrassed by her lack of status. He called her a financial dead weight and walked out the door, leaving her standing in the silence of a home that was no longer theirs. The weeks that followed were a blur of cold legal documents and heartbreak. Mark was ruthless. He demanded the apartment, the savings, and even the furniture, claiming he had earned it all while she just drifted along. Alina didn't fight him. She signed the papers with a steady hand, her eyes dry and her heart turning into a block of ice. She moved into a tiny studio on the edge of town, and for the first time in 5 years, she allowed the mask she had been wearing to slip. You see, Mark had made one fatal mistake. He had assumed that because Alina lived simply, she was simple. He assumed that because she didn't flaunt wealth, she didn't possess it. He had no idea that Alina was the primary shareholder and the silent founder of Astrius Global, one of the most successful venture capital firms in the country. She had inherited a massive empire from her grandfather, but had chosen to live a humble life, wanting to find a man who loved her for her soul, not her balance sheet. She had used her mid-level job as a cover, managing her billion-dollar empire from a laptop in the early hours of the morning while Mark was still asleep. With the divorce finalized and Mark scrubbed from her life, Alina decided it was time to stop hiding. She returned to the headquarters of Astrius Global, not as a visitor, but as the CEO. The staff, who had been managed by her trusted board of directors for years, stood in silence as she walked through the glass doors. Her simple cotton dresses replaced by bespoke power suits and an aura of untouchable authority. She spent months restructuring the company, expanding her influence, and becoming the elite CEO the business world had been whispering about for years. Meanwhile, Mark was living his dream, or so he thought. He was engaged to Tiffany, and they were planning a wedding that was the talk of the city's social elite. But there was a catch. Tiffany's father, the real estate mogul, was facing a massive financial crisis. His company was on the verge of collapse. And the only thing that could save the family fortune was a massive investment from a mysterious firm known only as Astrius Global. Mark, desperate to prove his worth to his new family, promised Tiffany and her father that he could secure a meeting with the legendary CEO of Astrius. He bragged about his connections and his business acumen, unaware that he was walking straight into a trap of his own making. The wedding day arrived, held at the most expensive estate in the Hamptons. It was a spectacle of excess: gold-leafed invitations, towers of champagne, and a guest list filled with people who valued net worth over human worth. Mark stood at the altar, feeling like he had finally reached the summit. He looked at Tiffany, who was draped in diamonds, and felt a surge of pride. He had made it. He had left the broke girl behind and ascended to the throne. But as the ceremony was about to begin, a fleet of black subs pulled up to the entrance. The music faltered as a woman stepped out, flanked by a team of security detail. She wasn't just a guest, she was the atmosphere. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue that seemed to shimmer with the light of 1,000 stars, and around her neck was a diamond necklace that cost more than Mark's entire net worth. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as she walked down the aisle. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the stride. He recognized the tilt of the head. But it couldn't be. Not her, not Elena's. Alina walked straight to the front, her eyes locked onto Mark's pale, trembling face. The silence was deafening. Tiffany's father rushed forward, his face lighting up with desperate hope. He announced to the entire wedding party that they were honored to be joined by the CEO of Astrius Global, the woman who held the fate of his company in her hands. Mark felt the world tilt on its axis. The woman he had mocked, the woman he had abandoned for being broke, was the very person who could destroy his new life with a single signature. Alina didn't say a word to him at first. She simply looked at Tiffany, then at the lavish decorations, and finally back at Mark. The pity in her eyes was far more painful than any insult could have been. She leaned in close to Mark, her voice a calm, steady whisper that echoed in his ears like a thunderclap. She told him that she had come to deliver a wedding gift. She handed a folder to Tiffany's father. Inside was not an investment agreement, but a notice of acquisition. Astrius Global had bought out the family's debt, and as of that moment, Alina owned everything: the estate they were standing on, the cars in the driveway, and even the very business Mark hoped to inherit. Alina turned to the crowd, her voice projecting with the effortless grace of a leader. She thanked everyone for the invitation and remarked on how beautiful the ceremony was. Though she noted that true value can never be bought, only earned. She looked at Mark one last time, a man who had traded a diamond for a piece of glass, and walked away, leaving the wedding in total chaos. The aftermath was swift. Without the investment, Tiffany's father's empire crumbled. Tiffany, realizing Mark had no actual power or connections to save her, called off the wedding before the cake was even cut. Mark was left with nothing. No wife, no status, and no home. He tried to reach out to Elena, sending dozens of emails and making hundreds of calls, begging for a second chance, claiming he had made a mistake and that he still loved her. But Elena never answered. She didn't need to. She had moved on to a life where her worth was defined by her own achievements, not by the fickle opinions of a man who only saw what was on the surface. She continued to lead her empire, but she remained the same woman at heart, someone who knew that the greatest wealth isn't found in a bank account, but in the integrity of one's soul. In the end, Mark learned the hard way that when you throw someone away because you think they have nothing to offer, you might just be throwing away the most valuable thing you'll ever have. Elena proved that being elite isn't about the clothes you wear or the titles you hold. It's about the strength to stand tall when the world tries to diminish you. It's a powerful reminder that we should never judge a person's value by their current circumstances. You never truly know the depth of the person standing next to you, and more importantly, you should never underestimate the power of someone who has been underestimated their entire life. True success isn't just about winning, it's about remaining whole while the world tries to break you into pieces. And sometimes, the best way to show someone your worth is simply by living a life so grand that they become a distant, fading shadow in your rearview mirror.